Leave is granted.
Madam Speaker, on the 14th of November last year, I advised the House that the government had commissioned an independent review of Australia's system of aviation safety regulation to be undertaken by a panel of 3 eminent and experienced members of the International Aviation Community. I can now advise the House that I have received the review report from the panel chairman, Mr David Forsyth, and I acknowledge his presence in the chamber today. The report confirms that Australia has an excellent safety record and an advanced aviation regulatory system. It also recognises that there are opportunities for the system to be improved to ensure Australia remains a global aviation leader. The review makes 37 recommendations for the government to consider, which collectively would represent the biggest reform in aviation regulation in decades. The review panel has engaged widely with the industry. The aviation agencies and other stakeholders have all been consulted. Some 269 written submissions were received. The panel also considered international trends in the aviation industry and emerging global practices in aviation safety regulation. The role of the regulator is pivotal in the safety system, and many of the recommendations relate to the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. They span issues such as the relationship between the regulators and operators, mechanisms for a more collaborative approach to regulatory oversight, the culture and skills required, and the role of the board. Other recommendations are aimed at strengthening the overall system and the arrangements for coordination across the work of the aviation agencies. These cover issues such as sharing of safety data and strategic planning through Australia's State Safety Program. In relation to the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, the report recommends an additional commissioner be appointed with operational aviation experience. An important set of recommendations relate to the finalisation of the long-standing regulatory reform program and guidance on principles for developing future regulatory change proposals. The report highlights the opportunities to improve the approach to regulatory reform, to reduce the volume and improve the clarity of aviation safety regulations. Madam Speaker, it's vital that Australia fosters a dynamic aviation sector. Aviation is an essential element in a modern economy. Given the speed with which the global aviation industry is changing and growing, we need to ensure that our regulatory system adapts to keep pace with the industry. Safety will always remain the government's highest priority. The government will commence consideration of the report in detail without delay. The report will be open for public comment for the next month. Written submissions received by the review will be made public over the coming days, except for those that were provided in confidence and a number of others about which the government is seeking legal advice. I'll advise the House of a comprehensive response to the recommendations as soon as possible. In developing the response, we'll be looking to ensure that our safety regulatory system is as good as it can be to support aviation into the future. We'll be looking to ensure clear strategic direction and coordination to support contemporary approaches consistent with global best practice and to foster effective industry engagement, in particular in regulatory development. Consistent with the government's broader agenda in deregulation, we'll be looking for ways to reduce regulatory costs on the industry without reducing safety. The government will also take account of the recommendations as we approach a number of important appointments in the aviation agencies. This includes the appointment of 2 extra members to the CASA board to bolster the aviation experience in line with the coalition election commitment. I also expect that the CASA board will give full regard to the report in its current process for selection of the next Director of Aviation Safety. Madam Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the review panel. Mr David Forsyth AM, the chairman of the panel, is the former chair of Safe Skies Australia and of the Air Services Australia Board, and has brought over 30 years of experience in the Australian aviation sector to the review. He was joined on the panel by Mr Don Spruceton, former Director General of the Civil Aviation at Transport in Canada and a former Director General of the International Business Aviation Council, and Mr Roger Whitefield, former Head of Safety at British Airways, a former Safety Advisor to Qantas and a former United Kingdom Civil Aviation Authority Board member. The panel was assisted by Mr Philip Rees, former President of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of Australia, on issues relating to the general aviation sector and regional operators. I'd like to recognise the substantial contribution by aviation industry participants to the review. I'd welcome industry views on the report and on the best options for ensuring effective processes and for representation in collaborative processes. The full report is now available on the Department's website. Madam Speaker, the independent review of aviation safety regulation was a commitment by the Coalition at the 2013 federal election. I welcome the panel's report as the first step towards a stronger and more harmonious aviation industry. I thank again the panel members, those who made submissions, officers of my department who assisted the inquiry as it went through its task, and I acknowledge the particular talents and skills that the inquiry members brought to this examination. The aviation sector has endured some troubled and sometimes tumultuous times, and I hope that this report will be the beginning of a more harmonious aviation industry, one that works well together and delivers safe and secure aviation for Australia for decades ahead. I'll table a copy of the report, and I ask leave of the House to move a motion to enable the member for Franklin to speak for 7 minutes.
I call the honourable member for Franklin. I beg your pardon, you better move first, yes.
I move that so much of standing and sessional orders be suspended as would prevent the member for Franklin speaking in reply to the minister's statement for a period not exceeding 7 minutes.
All those in favour please say aye. The contrary no. I think the ayes have it. I call the honourable member for Franklin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Labor welcomes the minister's statement, as we did when the minister announced this review into the aviation safety. Australia does have an excellent record on aviation safety, something that I'm pleased to say that this report recognises. Before I go any further, I want to make one thing crystal clear. The Australian Labor Party regards aviation safety as a non-political, bipartisan issue. There are many issues that come before this House upon which we have different views, based on our different political positions and priorities. We can argue about the budget, which we should, given the number of broken promises it features and its attack on average families. We can argue in question time, which we do on a daily basis. But on aviation safety, we are on a unity ticket. There are no politics in aviation safety. Indeed, every member of this parliament should see aviation safety as their responsibility. We should all accept that the job is never finished and that our aim must be continuous improvement. This is especially so given the constant technological change in the aviation sector, which contributes about $7 billion a year to the Australian economy. It is a dynamic industry that requires dynamic and well-resourced regulators. Those regulators need to be well staffed by the best experts available, and they need to be nimble and alive to the constant changes in the industry. In office, Labor reformed the aviation sector through a properly planned green and white paper process that left the coalition and aviation sector in good shape. Indeed, my colleague, the member for Grayndler, served as Transport Minister with distinction. More recently, as the Shadow Minister, the member for Grayndler and Labor have continued to take a bipartisan approach, backing the production of this report and agreeing to the government's move to add extra directors to the CASA board. The Aviation Safety Regulation Review is extensive. Its 37 recommendations bear close examination because they literally concern matters of life and death. It is pleasing to hear that there were 269 submissions to the inquiry and that the Minister intends to take public comment on the report. Governments are not the font of all wisdom on aviation safety. Experts within the sector have much to contribute to the process of reform, and it is fitting that the Minister appears to be going out of his way to consult widely. Labor welcomes the Minister's indication that he'll expedite detailed government consideration of the report and respond in due course. We also welcome the Minister's commitment to make written submissions public. Transparency in all areas of government is important, but on aviation safety, people's confidence in this review and the government's considerations related to it will be elevated if the process is transparent. There is no point rushing to judgment and making declarations about this review. Labor will treat this report with the seriousness that it deserves. Beyond offering our genuine commitment to be a constructive contributor to the process, we will assess the report in full before commenting in detail about its contents. But our starting point is very simple. Any reasonable measure that improves aviation safety in this country deserves our support. In his contribution, the Minister outlined the general thrust of the recommendations, including his intention to include the aviation sector in the government's broader agenda for deregulation. It is important that the Minister said that any reduction in regulatory costs to industry should not come at the expense of reduced safety. Labor agrees. The previous Labor government did much to reduce red tape, particularly across a range of sectors through the Council of Australian Governments. We also want to reduce costs for industry. But any changes need, as the Minister has said, to be carefully considered in light of whether they affect safety. You just can't be too careful. On behalf of the opposition, I would also like to thank the review panel for its work, including Chairman David Forsyth and the panel members Don Spruceton and Roger Whitefield. The member for Grayndler appointed David to chair Air Services Australia in 2008, and under his leadership, the board led a major program of investment in critical safety infrastructure, air traffic services and training of skilled personnel. I also thank those who made submissions. This kind of work can actually save lives. The opposition appreciates your efforts and, as I've made clear, will work with government on the report in a constructive way, putting safety ahead of all other considerations. Let me end by quoting the Minister's earlier contribution. As the Minister said, and I quote, "Safety will remain the government's highest priority." That is as it should be. I offer an identical commitment from the opposition. Thank you.